So, it's been a long journey, but this is our last video in the series. And it's just going to be kind of a hodgepodge of a bunch of little things that we need to do to finish things up. The first of which being is getting this table, this sacrificial tabletop level or slightly underneath my table saw. So real quickly, I'm going to use some blue tape so that I can mark on my piece without having to worry about, a permanent pencil line. Then with a really straight flat edge that I can actually reference against my table saw, bring it over, I'm going to be marking a line underneath in several spots. Want to make sure you have a very sharp pencil when you do this. Now hopefully those pencil lines will be even, but having it in multiple spots just verifies that maybe it's not tilting or anything like that. But because our frame sits pretty flat, I'm pretty sure it's going to be even. If it's not though, you definitely want to take the lower setting. You want this to sit underneath your table, not above it, so things don't bump into the side. Because once again, I do not like measuring. I'm just going to use a little gauge, lock it down, and then verify they are all the same. In actuality, this one in the back of the table seems to be about a 32nd lower than the one in the front of the table. So this is the measurement I'm going to go off of. Now using that measurement, I'm going to cut myself a kind of a gauge, I guess you would say. This gauge should allow me to slide my work off the table with just the slightest of gap anywhere on my tabletop. So with that gauge, you're going to want to find some kind of flat surface. I'm just going to use my tabletop. Could use a workbench, you can even use the floor. Then with a very sharp pencil, making sure that you're keeping the bevel on the plywood, not tilting this up. The bevel on the plywood, go ahead and mark all the way around all your legs. And you want that sharp pencil because if it's a wide pencil mark, you're going to have a much harder time sawing it. Now to me, this is a cut that is way too important to trust to a machine. So I'm going to be doing these by hand. But if you want to do it on your table saw or something like that, have at it. However you trust to saw to the line. But remember, in this instance, this is a situation where you want to leave the line. Because the lead is riding on top of that gauge. So what a lot of times I will do is I will come over and I will saw my lines so that if I get a little bit off, I can correct, and thus creating that path of least resistance. Before taking it all the way down. And now would be a good time to re-add that chamfer in. Remember, you are skewing the blade across. You're not coming directly across, you're not going straight down. You're kind of coming at an angle to create the bevel. That's a slicing cut. Now for some reason I got way off my line here, but if you need to chop it, just line up this long edge with that line right there and have at it. It's not that big a deal. Just check every few hits. Right on the line. Now if you're in any way unsure of your leveling ability, At this point in time, if you wanted to, and you didn't want to ever really separate it from the mobile base again, you could put a little bit of a thick epoxy in each one of the corners, and that way as it sat down, if one was a little bit shorter than the other, instead of getting that rocking action, the epoxy would harden underneath the foot and level everything out. Next, we're going to begin working on the power supply. And if you remember, this panel right here is removable. It is just friction fit in. Now there's a slight gap between that panel and this brace, and that's what centers this panel on the rail, so that I have an appealing gap on the outside that matches everything around. So if I could make a shim exactly that size, I can glue that to this brace right here, and then I can press this panel against it, and I'll get the gap exactly the way I want when I reinstall this panel. So my first step is I want to dimension down a piece of wood that'll fill in, that'll shim that gap. So here's the panel, here's my little start-stop button. It's got a little safety slapping paddle. My thinking is I want this to go as far forward in the case as I can. So here's the top and here's the front edge. So it sits like that right there. So I'm thinking this little slot right there, if I can somehow slide it in right there to have it protrude a little bit through the panel. Which means that on this side right here, what I want to do is just draw a square so that I can cut out just enough of this. Now if you remember, I did put glue in these panels along the top, along the bottom. So somehow, after I cut this, these top sections right here could be loose because I did not put glue in the center section. So I'm going to have to reinforce whatever I'm going to cut out with some kind of panel. And I'll probably use some offcuts that I did earlier because they will be fairly flush and shouldn't interfere with anything else. First up, let's mark this out. Bump it up against there. Maybe give you a little bit of wiggle room, but not too much. Grab your pencil, making sure the bevel is against the piece, and then just mark out your square. Next up, I'm going to glue in these braces. I'm going to drizzle a little bit of thin CA in the corners just to be sure it kind of wicks in there and secures everything. Now I own a scroll saw, so that's the tool that I want to use to remove this center section. But a scroll saw is really just a powered version of a coping saw or a press saw. And you can use those, or you could just use a chisel and lightly chop your way around to get around. A jigsaw with a flush cutting bit for this trim that we just added. You can do all those little things. I'm just choosing to use a scroll saw because, well, that's what I want to do. Now, no matter what you do, you're invariably going to have to do some cleanup. So just pick up your chisels, pick up some sandpaper, and get after it. Not too bad. I guess I could put some trim around there, but I'm going to call it good enough. So let's reinstall the panel and see where we're at. Oh, I can already see. I forgot about this. We're going to cut that out a little bit. No big deal. Then reattaching it. Now, one thing of note, this floating panel, this loose panel, these sides are 3/4 of an inch. So if it ever becomes loose, I can always drill a hole in here and screw into that to cinch it down, and that wouldn't show on the outside. But it's fine for now. And it looks like this fits pretty good. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is make a shim that'll connect from the top of the floating panel to this top section, so I could screw that into that one and it will be attached permanently to this floating shelf. I'm not going to worry about the bottom one because I'm going to make this flush with the sides, and my drawer slides are going to prevent it from coming this way, and I can actually anchor it from the inside to that slide if I would need to in the future, but I don't think it will because most of the force is coming this way when I'm hitting buttons. See, you push a button, it comes in. So if you have your drawer slides coming here, that'll brace it pretty solid. I just want to anchor it up here so it won't wiggle around. So after we get a block size the way we want, just a little bit of glue, drop it in where we want. Hold it for about a minute, and then let it sit for about an hour, and then we'll screw this to that. And finally, we are going to secure the top to the carcass. I'm going to be using 4 of these same little brackets I used on the internal pieces in order to keep this square from moving this way and this way. And I'm also going to use some figure-8 fasteners for attaching this to the top. This is a really common way. Figure-8 fasteners are a really common way of putting tabletops down in the modern day world because they allow for movement. I am connecting plywood to the long stretchers of a frame and panel design. The whole thing about these is it somewhat eliminates movement issues. So the reason why I'm doing this is because I have this on hand. In an ideal world, I probably would have made little wooden clips that would fit into slots, doing right there. But in order to make those, I'd have to either use my biscuit joiner and take all this out, or get a router bit that'll cut the slots on the inside and put a fence on the side. Either one of those doesn't sound too appealing, so I'm just going to use these little figure 8 fasteners, and they'll work just fine. We're never going to be lifting this by the top, but even if we did, this isn't that heavy. So you put enough of those, it'll be okay. What makes these figure 8s cool is you basically install half of it in your rail and half of it on your table, and if you recess it into your rail, it can rotate around and move. But in order to do that, one, it has to be dead flush. So what they did was they beveled this side so the screw will fit flush this direction, and then the other side they bevel the other way so it will fit flush that way. So you can screw one side into your rail, the other side in the table, get it flush with the rail, and you're all set. And it starts with, on this size figure 8, a 5/8 inch bit. So to install them, I will strike a line 1/4 of an inch in on the rails anywhere I want to put one of these figure 8s. Then pre-drill on that line anywhere I'm going to want to install one of these. Then take your Forstner bit, line up that hole, and it's just super simple. Just drill down till you think that that's about flush enough. Take a chisel, square up the corners. That way these things will have room to rotate, so to speak. Grab your bit, make sure that the bevel is going up, tap it down, make sure it's going to be flush. It's better to go a little bit too far than not enough, so I'm going to recess it just a tad bit more. There we go. Then secure it with a screw. And last thing, tap it so it is somewhat centered. From there, just flip it over. And screw it down. And then in each one of the corners, really, really tightly, go ahead and screw down a brace. That'll prevent the top from moving so much. Now hopefully this will be the last time you gotta flip this thing, because it is starting to get a bit heavy. But as you can see, those circle 8 clips hold the weight of this thing right here. And with how router tables are designed, you know, this will probably be the last time I ever need to take the router plate out, because all the tooling can be adjusted from the top. Let's open it up, access the router, raise up the router to make it easier to plug in. Drop in our separator. I'm sure this can be stored here. The last little accessory nicety I'm installing is an eye bolt and this carabiner, I guess you call them. I'm not quite sure. Just to hold the electrical cord. That way, the 95% of the time that I'm not using this as a router table, I can just loop it up, and drop it right there, and it'll keep the cables out of the way. So get the sacrificial top on there, and that's a wrap on this project. The last real thing I have to do on that is obviously make the drawers, and I'm putting that off for a free video I'm going to do on my YouTube channel to the general public. Because one of the reasons why I made this router table was for production work, and I want to make a box joint jig, my way of making a box joint jig, and that seems to be a general video that could benefit a lot of people. And I'm going to use making the drawers here, boxes with fronts on them, as the project in that making of the box joint jig video. So you can expect that in about a month. The other reason is we're in quarantine and I have to buy some supplies to make that jig, so I'd like to get this out and I'll just make that public. Now, as you wrap up this project, I want you to think about what you've learned. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I didn't do that I would do for a real project. You did not see me sanding for finishing purposes anywhere. I have tool marks all over the place. I left all my nicks. I'm not going to steam out any dents. If there's a gap there, I'm not worried about it. This is shop furniture, and I do understand that I'm going overkill on the design and build of this thing compared to what pretty much everyone else out there does for a router table, which is, you know, plywood box, pocket hole screws, maybe rabbets, glues, and nails. I mean, those kinds of things will work and they'll last for 5-10 years. This is something that I'll be able to pass down or use for something else. I totally overbuilt it, and it took me probably 2 to 3 times as long as it would take to make that plywood box. But at the end, I know how to do a lot more than make a plywood box. I mean, if this is the kind of furniture you want to be able to build, this is what you should be practicing when you're building shop furniture. I mean, anything else is kind of like saying, I want to be a pro baseball player or a pro golfer, and then going practicing pool or diving or something else. It's a sport. It'll get your cardiovascular set up or your strength up, but it's not the sport you want to do. And I want to be a furniture maker. I want to practice the Morse and tenon joints, the dovetails, the dado, rabbets, grooves, all those things that's going to lock this thing together with joinery. And this gave me practice, this gave me learning opportunities, this gave me skill development, so that when I sit down and I want to design something, I have skills-based resources to draw upon. I mean, look at all the people you see online. They build these great shops and stuff like that, and then the furniture they're building for their houses is basically their shop furniture. The plywood boxes, pocket holes, and you know they could do better, but there's this confidence factor. This kind of work gives you that confidence to try to go to that next level. Because you know you can. You've got the skills. So as you complete this project, you look back at all you've accomplished, all you've learned, all the confidence you build. I want you to remember that it is always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others. Y'all be safe. Have fun.